Hello, I'm Sean Lambert. Today, I'm going to talk to you about this and these. So, a couple of days ago, I saw this come up on my Twitter timeline, X timeline, and I thought it was a really interesting conversation that Clint started. Now, Clint is a really interesting guy. He is an Australian wargame designer, and he likes to make games that are relatively innovative. And specifically, he focuses on games that are quick playing and relatively straightforward to play. Those are his overall design concepts for the most part. He focuses on games that are on the lighter side, on the simpler side. But he brings up this point of he's often wondering about why combat results tables, CRTs, are so common in war games. They've been around for a long time. That is the truth, and we'll get into that because there's some interesting comments below that try to pin it back to Charles S. Roberts, which, while not incorrect from the commercial standpoint, CRTs actually go back way farther than that. And they're still the standard method for resolving battles in most hex and counter war games. The one I've posted below is from Normandy 44, a very good game. That's by Mark Simonich from GMT Games, and it's a good example of the system, and I would agree. And Mark Simonich's system is very similar to Avalon Hill's. If you play late Avalon Hill games, it feels a lot like Simonich. And he also influenced games like Bitter Woods, for example. I think the Bitter Woods dice system and the Normandy 44, or whatever you call it, the 4X games, not that kind of 4X, the World War II games that Simonich has been recently working on, they all share a relatively similar style of CRT. Here's how CRTs usually work. You have a wide range of unit types in game, combat values ranging from 1 to 10, not always. With a CRT, you would get to add up the total value of all units on both sides and figure out the ratio between them. 3 to 1, 2 to 1, etc. And then you would take a look at the column for that ratio, roll dice, and see the result. Something like a A1 means a hit on the attacker, and a D1 is a hit on the defender. DR means the defender retreats, and exchange, or EX means they exchange. Both sides take a hit. So that's specifically in reference to the CRT from Normandy 44, obviously. CRTs often have much different values than just A1, D1, and exchange. So in general, this is true, but there are very innovative CRTs that have more than just hits and retreats. Bonuses like air, artillery, or elite troops might give you a column shift, where you use a column one space to the left or right. That is kind of one of the favorable things about a CRT, is you can just shift columns instead of using a lot of dice roll modifiers, DRMs. But that is not to imply that other dice mechanics cannot be used in tandem with CRTs, and they often are. Most CRT systems do also use dice roll modifiers. Now, there's some issues with this system. If I have a total strength of 199 and you have a total strength of 100, it's still 1-to-1. Now, you don't have to do that. You could have rounding rules. Most systems explicitly state how you're supposed to round if you are at near odds. So if you were to actually calculate 199 over 100, it's not 1-to-1, obviously. It's 1.99 to 1. And so if you have decimal-based odds tables, which do exist, I'm thinking of, I think Goss actually might have decimals in their tables. I've seen decimal tables, so where like 1.5 to 1 is different than 1-to-1. So there's no need to say that 199 to 100 is necessarily 1-to-1. Obviously, in simpler CRTs like the Simonich one or Bitter Woods, you would definitely have 1-to-1 in this situation. But the idea of those games is that the 1-to-1 odds are actually very interesting die rolls. And in Bitter Woods in particular, and Normandy 44 really, the most exciting die rolls in the entire game are usually the 1-to-1s. That is where the game tips its balance. So the 1-to-1 column is very, very important in those games. And it's also not to say that you can't get a column shift outside of just your raw strength. And so systems that are trying to emphasize the importance of something like air support might be more inclined to have 1-to-1 odds as kind of the baseline, and except for in extreme cases where one side extremely outnumbers the other. I think the most important column in any game is the 1-to-1 column. So what he's basically getting at is that it's not granular enough, which I think is a false premise here. But obviously Clint is doing this to kind of elicit conversation. His second point is that it forces players to do math, which is, he says it's easy if you've been doing it for a while, but players who are entirely new to wargaming might find it a bit jarring to do calculations like this multiple times every turn. And yes, I think that maybe is true, especially for younger players who came up with like Common Core math and maybe don't know how to do addition and division. But there are some really interesting tricks you can use. The key problem that you're trying to solve when you're evaluating a combat results table is the ratio of forces. But as Clint points out, maybe you're struggling with the basic math of calculating a ratio. And so it's important to think about, take a step back and think about what the best way to calculate a ratio is with mental math alone. If you have to resort to a calculator, something is probably going wrong already in the system. And if you are really doing like intense division, then it's probably not for the best. So let's take a look at some examples. All you want to do is look at ratios and how to reduce them. This ratio is 18-12. How would you evaluate that on a combat results table? Normally, what you would look at is just dividing the top number by the bottom number. So if the attacker is 18 and the defender has 12, you would take 18 divided by 12. But that's not always an obvious thing because you're going to have a remainder here. You can obviously fit 12 into 18 one time, so it's at least 1. And then you can fit in a little bit more. So it's about 1-to-1, but not quite 2-to-1. So in most cases, that's sufficient. You've already determined that this is 1-to-1. Now, if you have a 1.5-to-1 system, maybe you have to do a little bit more thinking, but not that much. You just have to take a step back and think about what you're really trying to do. Think about putting the bottom number into the top number. And so if it's attacker to defender ratios, and the attacker is supposed to be the numerator, then you compare it that way. There are some other tips and tricks you can use to calculate more exact ratios, but in general, just this very basic high-level mental math strategy of seeing how many times you can fit the bottom number into the top number is very quick mentally, and that's certainly one approach you can take. Now, I could probably do an entire episode on just mental math strategies in wargaming, but for those of you looking for a starting place, I think that's a good one if you're just brand new to war games and you're like, what the hell is a ratio? Just think about putting the bottom number into the top number. How many times can you do that? Now let's get back to some of the responses here. So Daniel Berger says that my friend said back in the day they used a D100 to resolve cases like that too. He's talking about the granularity issue. So I don't personally think the granularity issue is a big deal, but if you wanted real precision, you could have a D100 system. Some games that I've played that do similar things to this are like naval games. I'm thinking of Sea Krieg. Sea Krieg 4 has a D100 system for combat results, and the advantage to using a bigger dice is you can have more possible results. But a general CRT, I would still consider this actually to be a CRT, because you are still having results based on a die roll that you look up in a table. Then we get into much more negative comments that the CRT itself is a problem because it detracts from the flow and narrative of a game. Now, narrative-based games also use CRTs. Dungeons and Dragons uses a CRT. They do. Just because you are saying on a hit with X number of dice, say I roll these 4 dice, and I'm saying hits are on 4 or better, and I roll all 4, and I get 1 hit. What does that hit actually mean? You have to have something in the rules that tells you what a hit means. And to me, that's still a results table. You're still, theoretically, until you memorize it, having to look up the result of a die roll. So I don't think it's fair to necessarily present certain games that don't have a CRT that looks just like this. I don't think it's necessary to say that, well, you don't have a huge table, you have a little table. That makes it that you don't have a CRT. That's not true. Sandy says that they've done a bunch of games that have combat so far. They haven't used a CRT, but who knows? It's certainly a great invention, I think, by Charles Roberts. And he thinks incorrectly, because Charlie Roberts did use CRTs, obviously, but he did it because they already existed. And the concept of it really kind of goes back at least as far as 1824 Reiswitz's Kriegspiel, which recently celebrated its anniversary. I am actually in a Kriegspiel club, so I have played the original Kriegspiel rules only once, and frankly I wouldn't do it again because they're extremely slow, but they have combat results. And Clint actually responded to this one, saying that he predicts in the future most war games won't be using CRTs, that there'll be a shift away from CRTs. And I don't think that's going to be true. If they've been in use for 200 years, I bet they're going to be in use for 200 more. Then we get into some really negative comments here. So this Bartolomaj says that it's the worst system, ripping a game of fun. That it is no fun to have combat results tables. Compare that to the elegant mechanism from Company of Heroes, I assume. I think that's what COH stands for. I don't know. I've never played Company of Heroes. I think that is like a very low-level game, which doesn't really interest me. For the most part, I don't play tactical-level games like that. So, but he says he's okay with it if it's a computer game. So, if it's the worst system, it sounds like the worst part of it is just calculating odds. And if that is the issue, then you can solve that problem by getting better at mental math. Not my first choice, CRT, but a die roll modifier. CRTs objectively can use die roll modifiers. It simply isn't fun to do as a player. Rolling a handful of dice feels like play. You can roll 20 dice and use a CRT to look up the results, and it's done. So that is also not true. And finally, we get to one that is a kind of a positive one. At least it's referencing a good CRT. So Nicola points out that you don't necessarily need a CRT, but if the game has some complexity in it, bear in mind, not necessarily a good thing, and I would agree with that. You don't need complexity in a game to make it fun. But if you are the kind of player like me who values a system that feels sufficiently complex to not feel vacuous. Like I kind of feel like if you're not doing a little bit of math, then are you even really playing the game? So I think this is a great example. The BCS system is really cool. The snafu roll and the actual results tables are really interesting. If you look at some of the interesting die roll modifiers here, you can see that you can easily combine a wide list of die roll modifiers with a relatively simple combat results table. So you can do both. You can have complicated die roll modifiers but a simple table, a complicated table but rely mostly on column shifts, or you can kind of combine the two so you have moderate complexity in both and still feel like you have a really nice, dense, crunchy, complex system, which in my opinion is a good thing. Some people don't agree, but I think that having complexity in a game is valuable because it places some responsibility on the player to be a part of the game. It engages the player mentally. Yes, it can be mentally fatiguing to do it for 14 hours straight, but if you are not engaged with the game you're playing, if you can play the game without having to think, then what is the point of playing the game? That's my honest opinion. I am not in for simple casual games. I think that games should be something that fully engages you, that you are 100% focused on. You can't be looking at your stupid phone, scrolling threads on Twitter, and you have to be focused on the game. I think that there is a value to having it be the sole focus while you are playing. So what I want you to take away from this episode is that CRTs and any dice rules in war games are just a part of a larger system. And that, of course, a good CRT can be a great addition to that system. And that you don't need to reinvent the wheel completely every single time you make a new game. So for all the designers out there, don't be scared to just use the bread and butter. It tastes good. Just slap down some peanut butter, and the equivalent of peanut butter in wargaming is CRT. So with that, I want to leave you with a thought. Will your next game that you play be more of a complex, dense, with a big CRT kind of game, or are you looking for more of a quick playing game? And if so, what quick playing games would you recommend? Play your next game with a very open mind and really try to enjoy the game for what it is and not for what it's not. Not every game has to be innovative, and just because it doesn't seem innovative doesn't mean that it's not innovative. If you're an OCS player, for example, you might not see the surprise roll as the innovative mechanic, but that really is the most innovative thing in the system. And the way that interacts with the combat results table is so elegant and so beautiful. And so I think anytime you're playing a new game, I think you should be on the hunt for not just what connects this game to other games, but what does this system as a whole do for me as a player. But you'll only get there if you stay focused on the game. And I think the best games to stay focused on, or to retain your focus rather, are games that have enough complexity so that you feel satisfied with the mental challenge that you're facing and that you're not tempted to go look at your phone during downtime. You should be thinking ahead. So hopefully you're thinking ahead to the next time you're going to watch one of my videos. Till then, see ya.